Good afternoon or good morning. I believe it still is on the West Coast. We have a nice little webinar program scheduled for today. And my name's Amy Higgins. I work with the Maritime Beef Council and with Verified Beef Production Plus as the New Brunswick and Nova Scotia sort of coordinator. And we're very excited to bring this presentation to you this afternoon as we get into sort of a changing of the seasons into winter grazing or feeding. And so I'll just get into a little bit of an introduction of how things are going to work today. So I'm just going to start with a little introduction on VBP Plus. Also, this is the first time we've been able to offer French language interpretation. So if you do require that, there is a little button on the right side of your screen at the bottom that has a little globe. So if you need French language translation, then you click on that, click French, and then you'll hear the simultaneous translation into French language. So appreciate that, and it's a wonderful technology that Zoom and our translator partners are able to provide us with to offer it in both official languages. So in terms of VBP, as many of you may or may not know, it's a voluntary training and certification program that stands for Verified Beef Production Plus. And it carries all through our production system from the cow-calf all the way through to the feedlot. It is producer developed and owned. It's been a national program since 2003, so it's not exactly new. And some of the things that it's not is it is not restrictive to production methods. So regardless of how you personally are producing in order to fit any sort of niche markets or the conventional markets, it's not restrictive that way. And there's no restrictions on who you can sell cattle to or buy from in terms of that sort of thing. So that's part of VBP, and the modules include on-farm food safety, animal care, biosecurity, and environmental stewardship. And the certification process starts with a training session, and if you require to be trained, then just reach out afterwards, and we'll be able to set you up with your provincial coordinator. And there's in-person or online training and a webinar. Then there's record keeping, so 6 months for cow-calf, 3 months in feedlot, and then there's some certification that goes with that, which involves an on-farm audit and corrective actions may come out of that audit. So it's nothing that's brutal or critical. It just goes over how we prove the things that we say that we're doing. And this is a little screenshot of all of the VBP certified people in Canada, and VBP Plus is equivalent and is certified to go into the CRSB certified beef program. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about winter feeding or grazing and how that topic fits in within the VBP Plus framework. So whether or not you are a VBP operation or not, this is information that you can use, and so it's useful for everyone. So a couple of the key aspects of winter feeding grazing within VBP is one of the practices that we want to make sure of is that manure is stored and used in a manner that benefits the soil and manages against excessive leaching of nutrients into water bodies and groundwater. So one of those audit concepts is just to be able to answer questions about nutrient cycling. And if you've got an environmental farm plan or other written nutrient management plans, that makes sure you're covered from an audit perspective. A few of the checkpoints that we have with winter grazing that are within the VBP framework are that cattle are fed according to nutritional needs and have access to palatable water or snow as appropriate. So that makes sense. In the wintertime, you want to make sure that the cattle have appropriate things that are fitting their needs. And then the next piece that I didn't consider as a winter thing, but from if you're doing some grazing or needing Water, so water management, you might have power that's supplying some pumps, or whether it's solar power or whatever the case may be, just to make sure that those who are feeding the cattle and taking care of the cattle know what to do in case of those sort of outages or equipment failures. And that grasslands are grazing and managed in a way that maintains or improves soil health. And this piece again about manure and soil nutrients, making sure that they're managed responsibly. So wintering grounds for cow herds need to be managed to avoid excessive manure buildup and runoff. So we have 3 folks with us today from all over Canada who can have a little bit of a talk about their management strategies when talking about winter grazing or feeding. So first we've got John Duynisveld. He's worked with agriculture, agri-food at Canada at Nepan since the Nepan Research Farm since 2000, studying beef cow nutrition, finishing cattle, beef fat composition, residual feed intake, and pasture management. And he's currently co-investigator on a beef cluster research project that is sustaining legumes in pastures. He also runs a 300-acre pasture-based farm in Wallace, Nova Scotia. And then we have from Quebec, Bernard Doré has completed a bachelor degree in agronomy in animal science in 1983 from Laval University in Quebec City. Through his career, he has been involved during 15 years in the development and promotion of AI in beef cattle, 7 years as a teacher in animal science, and 2 years and with 2 egg colleges in Quebec, and 3 years in fed cattle commercialization. He is currently working as a beef cattle specialist or consultant since 2011, working with cow-calf producers across Quebec and also doing specific mandates for different organizations. And our third panelist is Sean McGrath, who is a 5th-generation rancher who, together with his wife Tanya and their family, manage a 112-year-old operation, breeding approximately 250 females each year and custom grazing another 200 pairs in the summertime. The ranch markets purebred and commercial cattle as well as grass-finished beef and is structured around grazing. Through his company, Ranching Systems, Sean provides consulting services to the beef industry, primarily focusing on livestock genetics and ranch and range management. Sean writes for several beef industry publications, and through his company provides electric fence supplies, forage tool, seed, and range monitoring education and tools. So we have 3 super knowledgeable folks here with us this afternoon. We are in webinar format. So if you do have a question, click on the little Q&A button and just type in your question. We will start with just a quick presentation from John, Bernard, and Sean on sort of what their operation looks like and how they manage this topic of winter grazing and feeding panels. And then we'll just get into some questions. So feel free, if you have a question at any point, to just type it in, and then we'll wait for the question and answer period, and I can sort of do some moderation. So John, you will be up first. John Duynisveld from Nova Scotia. So John, if you want to share your screen, I will stop sharing my screen and we can get into it. And there was a hand that was raised earlier by Doris. So I just want to make sure, Doris, if you've got a question, you can just type it into the chat box or into Q&A. So go ahead, John.
Okay, I had a little glitch there. Am I good?
Yeah, looks good on our end.
Okay, good. They're a little static. Okay. So I guess I'm approaching this sort of from 2 standpoints. From my home farm, where we have about 300 acres of mixed, mostly naturalized pasture. And on that we graze, we have about a 25 cow herd that we do cow-calf all the way through to grass-finished beef. We do we have about 120 ewes that we do grass-fed lamb off of. We do a bunch of pastured pigs and free-range chickens and turkeys and pastured eggs. So that's kind of gives me sort of one lump of experience that I kind of bring into this. And as well, I've been working for 20 years with the federal government as a beef research biologist at AAFC Nepan. And there we have 100 cow-calf to finish operation, which we do a variety of research projects with. In particular, we've had a few projects looking at doing fall grazing with corn and tall fescue and some naturalized pastures, as well as we had 3 years of bale grazing research doing, looking at how our animals performed as well as the economics of that. I've been using extended grazing for a long time on my own operation, for about 20 years now. And it was, I guess it'd be about 2003 that we started doing some of the fall grazing research at Nepan. And from my own operation standpoint, our goal is always to try and use our perennial pastures sort of from late April, early May, depending upon the season. Every year is always a little different. And our goal is always to try and have the cattle and the sheep on pasture until about Christmas time for most years. And then from that point, we go into things like bale grazing, or certain ones go into the barn, depending upon the class of livestock. And we've been bale grazing with the cattle since about 2000, I guess, was the first year we tried that on a small scale, and it's grown, and it's something I find works really, really well. Although up until this year, that's been our exclusive way of feeding our cows and most of our sheep through the winter. But this year, we're trying a few things a little different, just based on how our price of hay has gone the last few years in the Maritimes. So this is just a picture of some tall fescue. I took a few pictures yesterday just to kind of show what we're working with right now. So we've got a few fields that we put into tall fescue. It makes a really great stockpiled forage, especially through this time of the year. It holds its quality really well. It kind of gives you a nice big volume, and you're able to use it. Some of the research we've done with this at Nepan shows that its quality holds even like up over 12% protein through into March and April, which is really quite astounding. It's kind of got this waxy coating on the leaf. It's just a great grass for fall and winter grazing. And I know a lot of people will curse it for sort of late spring, early summer, but you can manage through that. It's just a picture of, again, I took yesterday of where our sheep are grazing on some of our perennial pasture. We had a really dry summer this year, and one of the things that came through very strong in a lot of our perennial pastures is some of our red clover, just because it handles the dry weather quite well. So you can see there's a huge amount of clover here. We're trying to get that grazed off before we get too many hard frosts that'll knock the leaves off of it. And the sheep are quite happily doing that for us. This is my cow-calf herd. So this is a pasture that would have been grazed by the sheep in probably mid-July. Again, we had a really dry summer, and when the sheep got there was a little bit tall, so there's a bit more of this taller, thatchier stuff left behind. But if you look in a little closer, you can see there's lots of good legumes and finer grasses, which is really what the cows are going after, and that's good. They seem to be doing fairly well on that. Just a picture of one of the places I'll be doing some bale grazing this fall. So this is this will actually be with my sheep, but I've used the same approach with the cows before. You can see our bales laid out here in the strips. We have 5 bales across. We've chosen this location in this field because it's going to be for the sheep, and it's actually, we have trees over on this side, so that the snow tends to get a little bit deeper by the trees. And on this side over here, there's actually a few more bushes along our laneway. So again, the snow will be deeper into this field sometimes in the winter. And so this field should be relatively open, and the sheep can actually, you can see our little blue water here. They can go back to the barn for a water trough. And again, we've used that for our cattle as well for some of our winter grazing. But really, the big thing I like about the bale grazing is it gives me this opportunity to take our feeding and get it far away from the barn, because this has been a farm for, oh dear, probably 160, 180 years. And the way it tends to work, at least in Eastern Canada, most of your fertility tends to be concentrated closer to the barn, where it's easier to put manure onto fields. So this field here is one that I just finished bale grazing actually 2 years ago. And it's got a nice layout of bales on here, but it was really, really one of our lowest fertility fields. So being able to move the bales out here and put the fertility down where it needs to go was great. And we have a pretty good clay soil, so the nutrients will bind fairly well to that. If you look off to the left-hand side, there's a bunch of bushes in here, which gives the cattle some nice shelter to get out of the weather. And there's actually a number of springs up in the woods just at the top of this field, and the slope all goes down along through the bales here. So there's a pretty steady water source that I've yet to have fail me. So essentially we bale graze this piece on here. This would be a picture from June, the year following bale grazing. So you can see the grass grew in quite well. After we were done bale grazing here, we bale grazed this piece down below. And then we've moved over off to the side. So we're able to use this wintering area that still gives us the shelter and the water source for our animals. Just a few pictures of some of our bale grazing. In particular, I want to point out, like when we're moving our wires for bale grazing, so this tried and true practice of driving your fence posts into the bale rather than into the ground, make sure they don't freeze into the ground. It makes life a whole lot easier. I was quite happy when I found that one out. Having a water source is something we, at least here in the east, it's really good to have a backup water source. Cattle do like to eat snow, but as you can see, the snow can get pretty thin on the ground sometimes. And even with bale grazing, they always seem to like to eat whatever grass is around as well. To slightly touch on the fact that 5 years ago, we had a huge winter of snow, and actually the snow in our fields was between 3 and 4 feet deep. You can see some of these bales, these are 4.5 foot round bales, and they're just barely poking their heads up over the snow. But our cows managed to get through it, and here's what was left over after they finished up a bale. In this case, actually, we didn't use fences. I would just go out and open up the tops of the bales, and the cows would come to the bales that I opened up, which is, yeah, there's pros and cons. I'd have to snowshoe out to where they were, which was because a snowmobile wouldn't go through the snow. It was a little too deep and fluffy, so it was a 1.5 mile snowshoe to go see the cows every day, but part of the fitness program. However, the last couple of years, most of our hay we buy in for our bale grazing, and it's become a lot more challenging to find hay that is cost effective. Typically, my cost of wintering a cow on bale grazing on average over the last 10 or 15 years has been around the $200 range, give or take a little bit, depending on the year. But the last couple of years, that's gotten up into the $300+ range, which I'm not so happy with. So I'm trying this year, and this didn't quite go exactly according to plan, but to use grazing corn. But we planted the corn at a 60-inch row rather than the standard 30-inch, and in between here we've put in a cover crop of turnips, kale, red clover, and fall rye. But you know, Mother Nature never quite gives us a straightforward path on anything, and it was quite hot and dry this summer, and the red clover and the fall rye did not catch very well, so we've got mostly turnips and kale, which isn't quite the mix I was hoping for. And also being so hot and dry, instead of our corn being sort of at a moderate level of maturity, it's actually quite mature, so kind of rethinking our strategy on how we're going to graze that, but we'll figure it out as we go along. Turnips grew quite well, so that's good. This is just my boot here for an example on the size. For our young cattle, we have a polyculture of 11 forage species that they'll be going on hopefully tomorrow afternoon. So it's largely dominated by brassicas, just the way our growing season went, but there is a number of, there's millet and fall rye, clover, corn, sunflowers, oats, and peas in there as well. And the other thing we tried a bit this year, I had a neighbor that was looking for a bit more land to grow cobblage for his dairy herd, and I needed someone to plant some corn for me. So he planted some corn on 16-inch rows again, and we put a mixture of annual ryegrass, turnips, and red clover in between the rows. And we'll be grazing this with the sheep actually, but this is the cover crop coming up between the rows, and we'll also have the corn stalks to graze to provide a little bit of fiber to go with this. So it'll probably be 3 weeks before the sheep actually get on this, but looking forward to see how that's going to work out. How am I doing for time? I have a couple little pictures on some of the stuff we've done at Nepean that I can touch on, or I can save if there's questions around that.
Yeah, no, I think we're good. You can carry on.
Okay. Just, this would be about 10 years ago, we tried a little bit of swath grazing at Nepean. We had a herd of 20 cows that they were calving in the fall. And this was a mix of, it was German millet, fall rye, and it's a vetch of some, I can't remember the kind of vetch that was in there now. So we had to swath this, so the rows were basically in a 20-foot center, and we grazed this with our cows for 6 weeks from 1st of January until mid-February. Started off going really, really well. Come down and the cows were digging through the swath a great old time. And then we had 2 or 3 warm days where it just got nicely up to 3-4 degrees above zero. And then it turned really cold again. And basically our swaths were encased in a pretty heavy bank of ice. However, the cows did manage to persevere through it, but we did have some concerns about how they did maintaining body condition. This is just a picture of one of our first grazing trials on, this would be from early December for tall fescue at Nepean. Worked out tremendously well, really. I've just been sold on grazing tall fescue in the fall since then. And here's a couple of pictures from Nepean of our cows grazing in a snowstorm for bale grazing. And you can see that, our cows are in pretty good condition going into this, which I think is important for going into winter grazing. Having that good body condition, having a good coat of hair, so that they're able to withstand any of the elements, And they actually, I don't know, the last time that my own herd of cattle stayed in the barn or had access to the barn all winter, I was bale grazing, and they were coming back to the barn for water and shelter. In the entire winter, there was only 3 days that they actually stayed in the barn at all. Otherwise, every night they'd be out down by the bale grazing, and so it makes me feel that there's between bushes or portable shelters, there's ways of making bale grazing or winter grazing work, and not having to have the animals come back to a barn for shelter. So that's sort of where I come from on the fall winter grazing side of things, and look forward to hearing the other presenters and seeing what you guys have for questions.
Excellent. So while we are, Bernard, do you want to get your presentation queued up there, and we'll just roll right into it? And a reminder, if you've got any questions, now that John's gone through his presentation, just make sure that you throw them into the Q&A box. So I'll throw it over to you, Bernard.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And thank you for having me on this panel. First of all, I should say that, should point out that I'm not producer myself like John and Sean, and so what I'm presenting is really what is, to the best of my knowledge, what is going on as far as fall grazing and winter grazing, if we can say winter grazing in our situation in Quebec. First of all, the grazing period for most of the province, usually it starts about, depending on the area you are in the province, but if you're in the south of the province, it's generally starting about late April, early May. But the rest of the province, I would say, is towards the end of May, usually. And from year to year, many people would like to go as far as November and December, but it's not easy every year. And so on average, we can say that there's a grazing season of about 140 days, but it's all averages that I'm presenting to you. And there's certainly some producers who are pushing that to 160, 180 days, and some that are year after year going to already all the way through early December. This is an image of about mid-October. What it's a customer, one of my customers' place. Usually by mid-October, this was last year, but there's some snow already on the ground, so there's still some grass that you can see. But generally speaking, most cattlemen, they would start feeding round bales on pasture before they move the herd to the winter yards or the wintering yards. This is another image this year. This is more by mid-September. So you'll see this could be a good field to do stockpiling in that area. This is north of the province, but that gentleman, usually what they do, they would graze that until it is hard frost. And for that same area, the very heavy frost came about 3 weeks ago. So that picture was taken about early September, and already 3 weeks after that, it was a hard and heavy frost. On about pasture management in the province, there's all scenarios possible and all situations from no rotation to rotation every single day or even every 2 days, strip grazing. But there's one thing as a remark or important remark that I have to make is in Quebec, the regulation does not allow people or the cattle to get access to water, whether it's creeks or river, so it's strictly forbidden in the province. I don't know if it's the same across Canada, but at least here. So it means that all the rivers and creeks, they have to be fenced out. Also in the fall, usually we get lots of moisture in the fall. And this year was no different, and even in certain extent worse than some years. So on pasture, specifically on clay soil or clay loam soil, heavy soil, there's really a risk of lots of damages. This photo is, let's see, was taken early October in an area north of the province. There, we can see that there was still some grass, but not much left. When I referred to lots of moisture, this photo I took was 2 weeks ago, just to show you in a yard how wet it was for 3 to 4 weeks. So if you translate that moisture into a pasture or all pastures across the province, this year was terrible for that, and many people, they had to pull their cows from the pastures sooner than a normal year. Ideally, I should say, some producers are using techniques like stockpiling or even some bale grazing, and some people have also tried over the years doing some corn grazing. But there's some obstacles, like as far as the bale grazing is concerned, here it is strictly, again, forbidden to spray or apply manure on frozen ground. So from that regulation, bale grazing becomes a technique that is quite difficult to do it. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but some guys are using it, trying it under some conditions, but they have to make sure at all extent that they avoid any water runoffs and to be legal. Also, through the winter or this period of the year in the fall, like John said, water availability also can be an issue. Though generally speaking here, our producers, they have water in most pastures, since the cattle cannot go and get their water in water source or creeks. There's water lines on the ground almost everywhere. But when comes the first frost in the fall, those lines are for sure freezing. As well, I'm mentioning in that slide that there's some also trials and some new types of grass that are appearing, whether it's kale or also some new clover, but it's just really starting. People, I would say, or I should say, are still quite, I would say, conservative as far as the type of grass they're using in their mix. This is an image of corn silage, but the corn grazing, there were some producers using it It's not really a common practice, but I personally, I believe that there's a good opportunity for some producers to use that technique more here in Quebec. Swat grazing, I'm saying that was almost impossible, but after seeing John slide with the bales that were under all that snow, I'm almost convinced that we could as well try to do some SWAT grazing. But the main reason here why it is so difficult compared to, let's say, out west in Alberta and Saskatchewan, there's lots of moisture here and lots of also snow. And our winters these days are very variable. So we can go from rain to freezing rain to snow to all kinds of wet snow and all situations. But and usually in the fall, most people, they would just simply pull their cows out of pasture, let's say at this time of the year, early November or through the end of November, and they transfer them to what we call the wintering sites. Those wintering sites are designed so that they have to be at the minimal distance of water sources, wells, creeks, rivers. The cattle are just held in pens like yards out west, and we create or they add straw, which is forming, like they have to maintain that ice pack system. They feed the cattle on those sites, and the feeding system really all depends of if they're using silage, dry hay, or a combination of the two. This is not truly a wintering site, but this was taken last week, eastern Quebec towards the Gaspésie area. That lady, she was just feeding the herd on pasture and also before moving the cows to the wintering sites. This photo is showing you what we are calling, like this is a wintering site you see with all those windbreaks. Usually there's calf shelters as well, depending of the your calving area, calving period. For this own situation, the cows are calving starting about mid-December and January to end of February. So it's a must to have at least a few calf shelters. Windbreaks are very important, and there's also, we're going to see it later on, there's also a dome or a mega dome to serve as a bedding area or a feeding area. This is another wintering site with this is one is on a sandy soil across with trees all around the wintering sites, and they were feeding corn silage and dry hay. Like I said, on those wintering sites, there's equipment that is needed, like the heated water bowls, the calf shelters. Depending if you're calving, you need a barn. And more, the conditions are changing. So like I said, we can go from very cold to very mild, and also from rain to snow, and over the last few winters. Some producers, they also in the northern part of the province, it's a kind of a bale grazing that they do. They will put rows of round bales all tied together, and with an electric fence, they make sure that they have enough, there's enough hay for about a week or 10 days. So they have to feed the herd basically once a week or once every 10 or 15 days. or other guys, not really frequently, but we can see some that are giving access, like the cattle, they get access to directly to a silo, whether it's corn silage or other or grass silage, and they get access directly with an electric fence controlling the access. This was the dome that I was talking about, like on the wintering side. Some people, they are opting for domes like this, or barn, or an open shed, depending of your needs and what you prefer. Again, another pen or with windbreaks. I don't know if it's windy everywhere in Canada, but here along the St. Lawrence River on both sides, the wind is fairly strong. Just before I close my presentation, I'm saying that most cattlemen, and I think it's a wish or it's an objective that they have, they would like to extend the grazing period as much as possible. They even hear sometimes some people saying that if ideally they could not start the tractor all winter long, they would be very happy. But we're not there yet. So but it's important that we have webinars like this one, and that we also promote all those techniques. This year, I'm just mentioning about droughts like summer. This summer was terribly dry in May and June. And so the first cut of hay was very poor, but then second cut was good and third cut. And then we had all the moisture that you can imagine for September and October. So with a year like this year, combined with that COVID-19, it's really not a very good year overall. This is another guy in the northern part of the province that is keeping all his cows outside and wintering them just with the bush as the protection. And finally, these guys looking at me about 3 weeks ago on that pasture, there was still some grass. And so I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be as well happy to answer any question.
Great. So Bernard, once you get out of your way, and we'll queue up Sean, there was a question specific though to you, Bernard. Can you clarify why you can't bale graze in Quebec in the winter? I think you mentioned regulations, but we just want some clarification. Is it because of manure in runoff when everything melts?
Yeah, it's basically what you said. It's really about manure and water runoff when it all melts in the spring. So it means that basically you could do it, and also you have to respect some distances from the any water source. So there's some distances that they have to be really met from the bale grazing site to the water. I don't know if that answers, but oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, I think that covers it. But if it doesn't, can we just make sure that that person cues in if they need any additional clarification?
Okay.
So Sean, we'll get you to go, and then we'll get into the question and answer. We've got a few questions coming in. So like we mentioned before, just plug into the question and answer.
Perfect. Hopefully you can see my screen and hear my voice. So we're a little different than John and Bernard. So our ranch, we're located in northeastern Alberta. So just to kind of put that in perspective, Chinooks are not something we would ever rely on. So we're not, you know, we're quite different than southern Alberta and parts of southern Saskatchewan. When winter comes, it's here. Our operation is a little different than a lot of them others as well. Our home operation is about 3,500 acres, and we would be probably 85% or more of that would be native rangeland. So our feed resource is quite different than a lot of other places. So this is actually, well, you can see the hoop pictures from 2017, but the picture on the right was taken a couple of weeks ago, and that constitutes the vast majority of my winter cow feeding plan. So we graze, we have a lot of fescue native rangelands. The reason I put the hoop in there, so what we do with the hoop is that's actually how we inventory our winter feed. So I do range health assessment, so that's part of the verified beef criteria as well. But we'll actually, if I clip one of those hoops and weigh the production in grams and multiply by 20, that'll give me a dry matter per acre rough volume. The other thing we'll do is we'll take grab samples of that and we'll feed test it before cows go out there, so we have a bit of an idea what's going on. And typically that stuff's going to cure off depending on the year and the location and the type of grass and the terrain. Can be as high as 12% crude protein. Typically it's going to run about 9. So this is kind of what feeding cows looks like for us. Basically, in an ideal year, our cows would be eating snow. We monitor those snow conditions. For us, the advantage of eating snow is that, you know, if you look at this picture out here, when they're eating snow without fencing it, those cows will put a footprint on every square foot of that whole pasture. Their water source is right where their feed source is. The one thing we're extra careful with when we're winter grazing is we do have to monitor body condition carefully. If you're not paying attention and there's all of a sudden you get a big storm event or something like that, a cow could potentially lose a body condition score fairly quick. So we pay a lot of attention to that. The one thing we do, sometimes our TDN or our fiber on that pasture gets quite high. So what we'll do is we'll supplement with a high protein source. So this is actually on the left-hand side. That's a picture of a truck unloading dried distiller's grain. So that's the leftover component for making ethanol. So there's almost no starch, roughly 40% crude protein. And then it's all about the same energy as you would think of as for barley. What we're really after is the crude protein. So we'll supplement it. We'll put it in this fancy wheel on the back of this beat up truck. And we'll roll out, if weather dependent again, we'll roll out about 2 pounds per cow every 4 days. Just that extra bypass protein lets her intake go up almost a full % of her body weight. It can increase her intake, so she can actually get more forage into her and therefore get more nutrition out of the forage that's there. If it's really cold, so we had a lot of weeks last winter where it was minus 40. And we would actually go out and boost that supplementation. We'd run out every 2 days probably and supplement those cows. The other advantage of doing that, you can see they're here in the row on that bottom picture. If you're brave enough and you think the truck will make it through the snow, we can actually feed that supplement through buckbrush and various places and move those cows around that pasture as well. Get them to locations where we want them to clean up. So that's the majority of our cow feeding plan for our mature cows. You know, it's weather and snow dependent. If everything works out this year, we've probably got grass ahead of us until probably into the middle to the end of March. This is kind of our swath grazing plan. So these are annuals. So this is bunker triticale cover crop mix with turnips, radishes, forage rape. The purple flowers are hairy vetch. And then there's some fall rye in there as well, so that we can come back and hit it with some spring grazing afterwards. Kind of what we're trying to do here is balance energy and protein and keep that protein level up on those for those cows and for calves. So we'll wean calves onto this type of feed as well. These are cows swath grazing. This is last winter. The reason you see the tractor in the picture is actually the snow is up to the logo on the front of the Ford. So the tractor is actually there pulling out the truck. You know, we can graze, those cows will graze through easily through 2 feet of snow. Again, depending on snow conditions, you kind of have to pay a bit of attention. You know, and they'll power through. If you can keep the end of the swath open, they'll power through a lot to get at those swaths. Again, we'll feed test all that. Typically, we'll see cows gain condition. They'll gain roughly probably 100 pounds over the winter on the swaths. The other thing I think that relates to that is our calving period. So we calve May, June, and we'll wean our calves early. So typically we've got sort of second trimester dry cows going on to that native rangeland. So they're actually at their lowest nutritional need for the whole year while they're on that prairie. Those cows will pick up a conditions, half a condition score to condition score on the native, and then they'll gain another condition score here on the swath grazing. You know, for people that aren't sure if a cow can swath graze, just stay in the house and you'll be amazed how well they do. The other thing for us is the labor savings. I mean, if I don't get my truck stuck, which is most of the time, you know, we're 20 minutes, maybe twice a week moving cows, and our labor cost works out, it's like $1.42 a week or something if I pay myself a fair wage. We are similar to John in that we do a lot of bale grazing. We've actually had research projects here. I told the guys when they were here that we had the most identified bales in Western Canada because they GPS the bales and they flew drones and they pinpointed nutrients. We actually use it. We don't wean calves even in the corral anymore. We wean calves onto bale grazing. Mostly because I'm cheap, partly because I'm lazy, but also because the health of the calves just seems better. They're out and not in a corral. We'll always give those calves a source of fresh water where we might force cows to eat snow. The other thing is the calves will waste a little bit more than the cows, but we'll come in afterwards and clean up with cows if we think there's too much waste. We just want those calves to always have fresh feed in front of them. We have bale grazed similar to John. We have bale grazed where the snow has been up to the top wire of the fence. So it would have been 3.5 feet high. We have bale grazed where we couldn't even push our way in with a tractor. And I've snowshoed in and the wind will blow out a hollow around those bales. Snowshoed in and put in a single poly wire, and the calves have gone up over the banks and dropped in around the bales, and you'll just see the top of their backs and they're fine. They're just happy as clams. So that's been a good solution for us for the calves and also for cows if we get into those types of conditions. Our strategy is kind of always to start with the cheapest way of feeding cows first, and then move to more expensive as we're forced to go that direction. On the right-hand side is a picture of another type of feeding that we do, and this is rake bunching. So we take really old technology. So this rake is actually fully depreciated. I think Dad said they paid, I think it was $250 for this rake back in 1954 or something. So it's paid for. It's never had a flat tire. And we graze quite a bit of standing forage in the fall, but we found with some of the alfalfas and stuff, they got stemmy and lose their leaves. And occasionally we'd run into where just scratching nasal passages and stuff on calves, we'd maybe run into a little bit more pneumonias than we thought we should have. So we actually found some papers from Oregon. And so what we'll do is this field was grazed. We did 3 cycles through it with cattle this spring/summer. So this would technically be the 4th cut. And then we just take this old steel wheel dump rake and pile it into piles. It preserves the forage quality. And then the other thing is that the piles are easy to access through the snow. And because they're piled, they're almost softer on top. So it would take a ton of snow before an animal couldn't break through that. And we'll probably hit that with calves after we wean. The other thing we'll do with those weaned calves is we'll put them in with our bred heifers. So we've got a group of little bigger cows that can help, one, know where the water is, but two, also can, you know, if we're on swaths or we're on bunches or that type of thing, you've got a little bigger class of livestock that can help access that feed. And finally, what I kind of thought was the most important thing that that we do in terms of our winter feed is we do a ton of feed testing, and we formulate rations. So even those cows that are out in the middle of nowhere or they're grazing swaths, we'll have a pretty good idea what is out there in terms of a feed resource, and then we can adjust supplementation as we need to. So for us, that's been a real key, and it's kind of opened some doors. And then the rest has just been creativity and the fact that math and learning that our cows can really, I mean, they can do a ton on their own. So I have no problem letting them do that. So that's kind of where we come from. It's a little bit of a catch-all here, but it's kind of, I don't like running tractors, and I don't like paying for diesel, and I don't like all the things involved with it. And so it gives us some flexibility in terms of, you know, if the tractor won't start, I can take the truck, and if the truck can't get there, I can take some snowshoes and move a poly wire and make sure those cows are fed and have access to feed. So that's kind of how we handle the winter time. So.
Great, thanks, Sean. So I did have an earlier hand up from Doris Bissonneau. I'm going to click allow to talk, and if you'd like to ask your question, you can do so. And for anybody who's English speaking, if there does happen to be a question in French, make sure you're tuned into the English channel so that you can hear the French translation. So Doris, do you have a question, or was it a mistake was it an actual hand raised? Okay, well, we will move on to, there was a question that came up, John or Sean, I guess, both of you mentioned using turnips. Do the cows chew at the turnips themselves, like into the root, or do they only eat at the leaves?
Well, they'll eat almost all of the root, really. Depends. Before the ground freezes, sometimes when they grab onto the top of the bulb, the whole bulb comes up out of the ground, in which case they'll eat the whole thing. They eat the leaves first, typically, but they pretty quickly learn to go after that root. And when the ground is frozen, they sometimes can't get the whole root, but most of the bulb is actually up above the ground, at least like 2/3 of it. So, and they will go down into the ground if conditions allow, based on the experiences we've had in the past with them. So yeah, and it's pretty good feed value. It's roughly 11-12% protein and about, oh God, 80-85% TDN. So it's really, really high quality feed.
Yeah, and we've had the same experience where, you know, if they can pull it out of the ground, and once they get onto it, they'll actually go and you'll see a hollow in the ground as deep as a cow can get her teeth in there to eat those bulbs when they're frozen in. Mm-hmm. We have neighbors that winter graze bison, and I guess my cows are polled, but their bison will go around and hook the turnips out with their horns and eat them. So they're kind of like candy for cows.
Very, very enterprising. So this was an earlier question and could go to all of you. From an animal welfare standpoint, how do you deal with water availability and wind protection at all times for the cows? So just what runs through your mind? Bernard, do you want to start with that one? Oh, you are on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. No, you're on. I'm on. As far as water availability here in the province on those wintering sites, like there's everybody, they have heated water bowls and everywhere in the province, whether you're in the northern part and extremely cold there. There's also some without electricity water pumps that are, there's a few in the province that I know that they're using, but at all times here, as far as animal welfare is concerned, wind protection by all means and water availability has to be both. They are very important and they have to be met. But I do respect that out west, I know cows, they can survive on snow. But if we go with the official code of practice, I think for beef cattle in Canada, if I'm not wrong, I think they say that cows cannot survive with only snow in the winter.
I believe the VBP sort of.
You're muted or?
Oh, I believe the VBP asterisk with that is just to make sure if snow is your primary water source, and Sean, you can correct me if I'm wrong because you guys are probably more familiar with this than me, but that a backup water source has to be in a plan so that they've got a plan to get water out there as an alternative.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the code. We generally have freshwater access on swath grazing and bale grazing, and with younger class of cattle. And with the cows, I mean, you have to monitor that snow condition and fairly. I mean, you have to be on top of it, you know. And then we do have a backup plan. But those cows, I mean, we've got some cows that when they get onto the system, I mean, they won't even come into the yard when they can drink out of a water bowl. They'll just eat snow all winter. They won't even come in. So they do okay as long as the snow is of adequate quality.
Perfect. John, anything to add to that? Water availability or wind protection sort of covered?
Yeah. At Nepean, actually, we use a heated water bowl source just because our bale grazing sites have been close enough to the barn and that's worked well. But we don't have a lot of natural wind protection. So we have portable windbreaks that we use. Some of them are sort of based on some Western style strategies. And one of them is quite simple where we just put some boards on the side of a bale wagon and it just gave us nice portability. So without a lot of, from the water standpoint on my own farm, we've used a variety of approaches. Right now we're using sort of this spring that kind of seeps through our bushed in area. But prior to that, we have for most of our fields, we have a 4-foot underground water line that goes at least to some element of that field. And we can use just a slow running water. So it just needs to be a tiny trickle and it won't freeze even down, you know, well below -20 as long as it keeps moving. That can work out well to just make sure you have a fresh water source. And you kind of situate that in such a way that the runoff, you will put a little drain pipe that goes back off onto a drainage ditch to take the water away so you're not getting an ice build up around where the livestock are. And sometimes, like, it's just a matter of letting them back to the barn. It really depends on where we're grazing and what the situation is. I can just kind of flash up my screen here for a second. I do have a picture of, even though our cows sort of always have access to some kind of water source. Again, the same as what Sean said, they really do go out and graze snow. Like these cows down in the bottom of the screen here, you know, this is the water they have where it's kind of coming up through the seep through the snow for them. But they'll go and they go after that snow first. And here you can see the nice little pattern they leave behind just on the fresh snowfall. They seem to take snow kind of as their first option. And even when we had them, you know, going back to the barn for water, that was always the thing that they go after first. So I always found that quite interesting.
Oh, very good. So we've got one more question that has come in. So if you are bale grazing, is the idea to wait until the ground is frozen from the snow and then set the cows on the bales, or do you do that once the pasture's set? Like, do you set it all up, or what's the timeline there?
Well, we set the bales up as soon as we take them off the field. Like a lot of the bales that I buy in from a neighbor. So when he starts delivering them in August, he just sets them up in the pattern. I show him where we want them, and and he lays them out in the field. We pay a little bit extra for that, but it costs me an extra, I think, $4 or $5 a bale. It works out to, which is actually will be the same as if I were doing it myself, or paying one of my employees to do that. And then we take the strings off before freeze up, so that we don't have to deal with those strings. And then sometimes we will. It really depends on the time of the year, or the particular year, whether we wait till the ground is frozen or not. Because if our fall pastures are gone, then we have to go, put them on the hay, because that's where our hay is. We don't have another option. It's already out there for bale grazing. But yeah, typically with the bale grazing, where you're moving them frequently, there is minimal amount of mud around there. I find the fall is actually a lot easier for both grazing on pastures, even when it gets wet, or for bale grazing, than the spring, because at least the ground, when it starts to freeze, is freezing on the surface. But in the spring, you can have 5 or 6 inches of thawed ground, but then frost below that, and that's, I find, when it really gets muddy and damaging. But in the fall, it's typically not much of an issue.
Sean or Bernard, anything to add? Sean, go ahead.
We would be similar. So we actually we hire our bale hauling done, and he's quite good. He'll run the truck and spread the piles out. So when we get out there, the most we have to move a bale is maybe 400 feet. And what we've found is, again, we don't have the same moisture issues in the fall. I mean, hopefully one day, but definitely not this year. So we'll kind of go on to it whenever, however. And the work we've done, like, we'll move those sites around quite a bit and to places that are of low fertility. So the work we've done, like, we'll typically pick ground that's maybe compacted or not very productive. When PFRA, the last stuff they did, we took some stuff from 500 pounds an acre of dry matter production to over 9,000 pounds just by bale grazing it. So it's been a pretty good fit, but we'll put the bales out anytime, and then the cows will go on it whenever we kind of get to that point.
Excellent. Anything to add, Bernard? Because you had mentioned, like, with Quebec, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's a little bit different, and there's not really many people that are doing that bale grazing. But I would probably guess that they would put those bales when the ground is frozen or before, but
Okay. Well, we've gone over our hour time frame. I swear I could probably ask questions and talk about this all afternoon, but I do appreciate Sean, John, and Bernard, your talk today, and I think that was at least something to get people thinking, as if we're not already doing some season extension, into getting some ideas for next year and the future. So appreciate everyone for taking some time out of your afternoon to join us. And for those of you joining us from all over Canada, I hope all is well, and everybody should take care.
Super. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much.